Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. As dawn broke over the ravaged landscape, the horizon filled with the ominous silhouettes of converging forces. From the north, the undead legions advanced, a relentless sea of decay moving in unison, driven by the dark will of the necromancer. To the west, the ground trembled under the heavy tread of the Lycan pack, led by the formidable Alpha, whose howls echoed through the chilling wind, rallying his forces with ferocious roars. In the heart of the turmoil stood the human camp, a bastion of hope amid despair. The camp was a flurry of activity. Barricades were reinforced, weapons readied, and strategies discussed in hushed, urgent tones. Men and women, young and old, prepared to defend their home, their freedom, and their lives, with a resolve forged in the fires of relentless adversity. At the center of the camp, Alex stood atop a makeshift platform, looking out over the sea of determined faces. His voice rang out clear and strong, cutting through the morning air with the sharpness of a blade. Today, we stand on the brink of our final battle, he began, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. We've faced horrors that would break the spirits of lesser beings. We've endured losses that would turn hearts to stone. But here we stand, unbroken, unwavering, because we are bound by something stronger than fear, our humanity. The camp erupted in cheers, the sound a defiant roar against the encroaching darkness. Let them come with their shadows and fangs, Alex continued, his voice rising with passion. We will show them that as long as one of us remains standing, the light of humanity will never be extinguished. Today, we fight not just for survival, but for our future. As the echo of his words faded, the camp's resolve solidified into a tangible force, the air electric, with anticipation and the weight of impending conflict. Meanwhile, on a distant hill, a lone figure watched the unfolding drama below with detached interest. Professor Winter, seated comfortably with his legs crossed, observed the movements of both the undead and the Lycans through a pair of high-powered binoculars. His chrome mask, devoid of expression, mirrored the early morning light, making him appear almost spectral. Winter was well aware of the stakes of the impending battle, yet his isolation from it lent him an air of serenity. As he watched the humans rally under Alex's words, a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. So it begins, he murmured to himself, intrigued by the resilience of the human spirit, yet curiously aloof from the desperate fight for survival. As all forces converged on the human camp, the stage was set for a confrontation that would determine the fate of a world forever changed by darkness and light. Chapter 2. The clash at the gates. The morning air, already tense with anticipation, was shattered by the thunderous clash of two monstrous forces at the very doors of the human camp. The undead, driven by the dark will of the necromancer, met the Lycan pack head-on, igniting a fierce battle that shook the earth beneath them. Among the chaos, the gigantic werewolf, under the command of the Alpha, emerged as a horrifying spectacle of brute force. Its enormous frame trampled the undead beneath its massive paws, showcasing its unrivaled power as the apex predator on the battlefield. The sight of such raw power was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. As the melee ensued, the Lycan Alpha seized the opportunity to advance towards the human defenses, intent on converting the humans to swell the ranks of its pack. With a massive force, the Alpha lunged at the barricades, but as it made contact, an unexpected barrier halted its assault. The barricades, laced with silver, acted as a painful deterrent. The Alpha recoiled with a guttural scream of agony as the silver scorched its flesh, sending a clear message: the human defenses were not to be underestimated. Recovering from the setback, the Alpha howled commandingly, signaling the gigantic werewolf to focus its might against the camp's defenses. Alex, witnessing the impending threat, voiced his concern with urgency. "That thing will crush our defenses. We've got to do something." On the battlefield, the spectacle continued as the mutated Lycans, products of genetic tampering and Lycan ferocity, demolished the ranks of the undead with ease. Their enhanced strength and agility made them formidable adversaries, turning each encounter into a short, brutal skirmish against the relentless waves of zombies. Despite the power displayed by the Lycans, the sheer numbers of the undead horde presented a daunting challenge, continually pressing forward. The climax of the assault came as the gigantic werewolf, heedless of the injuries inflicted by the Silver, began to trample over the camp's outer defenses. The structure groaned and buckled under its immense weight, forcing the humans to fall back to a secondary line of defense within the camp. As the humans regrouped, the tension was palpable, the air thick with the smell of fear and determination. They prepared for the next wave of the assault, understanding that the survival of their camp, and potentially humanity itself, hung precariously in the balance. Chapter 3. The siege intensifies. In the heart of the battle, the air was thick with the sounds of conflict as Alex, Captain Knox, and Elena led the human defenders in a desperate last stand. They commanded their troops to unleash a relentless barrage against the gigantic werewolf that towered over the battlefield, but all to no avail. Arrows embedded with silver and homemade silver dust grenades exploded upon impact, yet the beast seemed impervious to their efforts. It was as if the werewolf was forged from the stuff of nightmares, utterly unstoppable and indestructible. As the battle raged fiercely, the Lycan Alpha, with a strategic mind and a savage desire to expand his pack, called back the giant werewolf. He did not want his potent weapon to annihilate the humans. Instead, he aimed to turn them, to assimilate them into his growing army of Lycans. With calculated ferocity, the Alpha himself began tearing through the inner barriers of the camp, his claws rending metal and wood alike in a fervent effort to breach the human defenses. Meanwhile, the mutated werewolves, those formidable beasts of genetic tampering, began showing signs of fatigue. Despite their enhanced strength and ferocity, the endless tide of the undead proved to be a formidable opponent. The sheer number of zombies was overwhelming, a dark sea of decay that ebbed and flowed with relentless persistence. Even the mightiest of Lycans found themselves hard-pressed to maintain their ground against such unyielding numbers. The battle wore on tirelessly through the day, and under a sun that beat down mercilessly upon friend and foe alike. As the hours passed, the shadows lengthened, and the battlefield took on an eerie glow in the fading light. The sun began its descent towards the horizon, casting long shadows and bathing the camp in an ominous twilight. The setting sun marked not just the passage of time, but also served as a harbinger of the dark night to come, a time when shadows grow long and the line between hope and despair becomes perilously thin. The relentless assault, the screams of the fallen, and the clash of metal against bone created a symphony of chaos as the defenders of humanity braced themselves for the night. Each moment, the sun sank lower. The urgency grew, knowing well that darkness could bring new terrors, or perhaps, in their darkest hour, an unexpected ally, or a new strategy might emerge. Chapter 4. The tide turns. The battlefield was chaotic, a clash of titans under a dimming sky, as the human defenders mounted their last stand against the supernatural onslaught. Amid the chaos, a silver-tipped arrow found its mark, piercing the Lycan Alpha. The creature yelped in pain, its demeanor instantly shifting to one of uncontrollable rage. With a ferocious howl, it commanded its colossal giant werewolf to renew its assault. The massive beast, towering over the trees, charged back into the fray with devastating force. Several defenders were crushed under its savage attacks, their screams echoing through the camp. Meanwhile, the mutated werewolves, once the pinnacle of the Alpha's offensive might, began to falter and fall. Their bodies littered the ground as they succumbed to the relentless waves of undead. Seeing his pack dwindling, the Alpha made a strategic retreat, pulling the remaining Lycans back to regroup. However, the undead horde, an ever-advancing wave of decay, pressed forward undeterred. The Alpha, desperate to bolster his ranks, sent the remaining pure werewolves past the barriers to transform the surviving humans into Lycans. As the pure Lycans breached the inner defenses, Alex acted swiftly. He hurled a silver dust grenade into their path. The explosive cloud of silver particles caused the attackers to recoil in agony. The werewolves, their skin burning from the silver, quickly retreated, leaving the humans a brief respite. The human defenders, donned in makeshift silver helms and crude armor fashioned from remaining silver supplies, stood defiantly. They were battered and bruised, but not broken. As they regrouped, the gigantic werewolf raised its foot for another devastating blow. But just then, a swarm of grotesque, spider-like undead surged forward. These spiderish undead, horrifying amalgamations with extra limbs grafted onto rotting torsos, swarmed the gigantic werewolf. Hundreds of them climbed its massive body, their sharp, gnarled teeth sinking into its flesh. The giant beast screamed in torment, thrashing wildly in an attempt to dislodge the creatures, burrowing painfully into its skin. The camp trembled under its frenzied movements as it indiscriminately trampled everything in its path. The Alpha howled, trying to command its behemoth to regain control, but the pain was overwhelming. The relentless assault by the horrific spiderish undead drove the werewolf into an uncontrolled frenzy. Ultimately, after minutes that seemed like hours, the behemoth collapsed, lifeless to the ground. The most dangerous piece on the battlefield was down. The human defenders, witnessing the fall of the gigantic werewolf, felt a surge of mixed emotions, relief, sorrow, and an unyielding resolve. They prepared for the next phase of the battle, knowing that while a significant threat was eliminated, the war was far from over. The field was quieter now, the impending darkness of night setting the stage for what could be the final confrontation of this epic saga. Chapter 5. The Fall of the Alpha. As the battle raged on into the twilight, the Alpha and its dwindling pack faced insurmountable odds. The undead horde, relentless and numerous, surged through the camp's defenses, overpowering the Lycans where the silver barriers had held them at bay. More Lycans fell, their ferocious forms collapsing under the weight of the undead tide, until only the Alpha and 3 other pure werewolves remained standing. Cornered and sensing the imminence of defeat, the Alpha attempted a strategic retreat. However, the undead were too vast in number, and the silver-infused defenses erected by the humans formed an impenetrable barrier, blocking any escape. The Lycans were trapped, with the undead on one side and the silver barrier on the other. Alex, overseeing the defense from a vantage point, noticed the desperate situation of the Lycans. Understanding the tactical advantage of letting the Lycans serve as a buffer against the advancing undead, he commanded his troops to hold their fire. "Hold the fire," he ordered calmly, his eyes fixed on the beleaguered Lycans. "Let them be the first line of defense against the undead." The defenders, though weary and battle-scarred, nodded in agreement, understanding the wisdom in conserving their resources while the Lycans still fought. The fall of the Lycans, though tragic, became a spectacle of raw primal courage. They fought with an intensity and ferocity that was unprecedented, each pure werewolf falling one after the other, their bodies piling up as they took down hundreds of undead assailants. The mutated undead and zombies fell in swaths around them. Finally, only the Alpha remained. Surrounded by a sea of decaying bodies and encroaching undead, the Alpha stood defiant, its eyes burning with a fierce light that spoke of defiance and unyielding spirit. With a howl that echoed through the camp, it charged into the mass of undead, its claws and teeth a blur of motion. The Alpha fought heroically, moving with a lethal grace. Each swipe and bite fell in multiple undead foes. Despite its formidable prowess, the sheer numbers of the undead were overwhelming. The Alpha, surrounded and outnumbered, continued to fight, each movement a testament to its strength and will to protect its pack to the very end. As the undead finally closed in, the Alpha looked towards the human defenders, a silent nod, acknowledging their shared struggle for survival. Then, as the undead washed over it, the Alpha fought until the last breath, falling beneath a wave of decay, its demise marked by a heroic stand that would be remembered in the annals of the survivors' history. In the quiet that followed, the camp stood in silent homage to the fallen Alpha, recognizing the bravery of an adversary who had fought with honor and ferocity, deserving of respect, even in death. The battle continued, but for a moment, the lines between friend and foe blurred in mutual acknowledgement of courage and sacrifice. Chapter 6. The Last Stand. The human defenders braced for the final onslaught, their hearts heavy but unyielding. Captain Knox barked orders, organizing the remaining fighters into their last line of defense. Elena gripped her weapon tightly, her resolve firm as she whispered, "This is it." Alex, with a fire burning in his eyes, rallied the troops. "We go down fighting." As the undead horde advanced, ready to engulf the human camp in a wave of decay and death, a sudden change shifted the tide of battle. Shadowy figures sliced through the ranks of the undead at supernatural speed, their touch lethal to the rotting flesh of their foes. As these shadows moved, they cleared a significant space around the human defenders. Once the area was clear, the four elders materialized in front of the humans. Varric stepped forward, his voice resonant with a somber tone. "Eternal life is not a gift, but a curse," he declared solemnly. "Today, we end this curse forever." With a determined nod to his fellow elders, they transformed back into their shadow forms and resumed their deadly passage through the undead ranks. The undead fell by the hundreds, yet it seemed to make no difference as more filled the gaps left by the fallen. Just as hope sparked among the human defenders, the necromancer unleashed his final gambit, a group of robed undead with a spark of high-level intelligence glinting in their eyes. These were not ordinary undead. They were his elite, immune to the Elders' shadowy assault. As the Elders moved to engage them, the robed undead hurled strange glass vials onto the battlefield. When the vials shattered, a blinding explosion of light erupted, enveloping the Elders. Caught off guard and overwhelmed by the intense light, the Elders collapsed, their powers neutralized. The scene turned grim as the sea of undead descended upon the fallen Elders. Varric, even in his final moments, turned towards the remaining camp members and managed a resigned smile, acknowledging their impending doom and his own end. As the Elders disappeared under the relentless wave of undead, their sacrifice marked a poignant moment of bravery and despair. The remaining humans, now without their unexpected allies, prepared for what might be their last fight. The camp was silent, but for the sounds of the approaching undead, Each step they took a drumbeat to the rhythm of an inevitable end. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit burned fiercely, ready to stand against the darkness until the very last breath. Chapter 7. The Vision of Three Futures. As the battlefield lay soaked in the blood of the fallen, the necromancer advanced with an air of inevitable triumph. Flanked by a horde of grotesque undead creatures, each more horrifying than the last, he marched towards the human camp for what he envisioned as the final blow. A confident smile played across his lips. The prospect of his undead washing over the remaining humans seemed a foregone conclusion to him. Perched on a distant hilltop, Winter observed the unfolding carnage through cold, calculating eyes. He had witnessed the fall of the Alpha and the sacrifice of the Elders. Now only two factions remained in this grim dance of death. As he watched, Winter's mind wandered to the possible outcomes of this apocalyptic conflict, contemplating the future and its shape under the reign of either side. In one vision, the humans prevailed. He saw a reconstructed society, a semblance of order reborn from the ashes of chaos. Yet, this new world was not untouched by the old vices of power and greed. Figures in authority hoarded resources, subjugated the weak, and constructed a government that was a shadow of past corruptions, a cycle of control and rebellion reborn. In another, darker vision, the undead prevailed. The world transformed into a bleak wasteland of death and decay. Cities crumbled under the relentless march of the undead, the lands barren and desolate, with no life to speak of. This future was a never-ending night, where the undead roamed supreme over a planet void of all other life. Then a third future emerged in Winter's contemplation, more isolated and introspective, a world where he was the sole survivor. In this quiet, desolate reality, Winter walked through abandoned cities, the master of a silent world. There were no battles, no struggles for power, just an endless expanse of solitude. This vision was neither dark nor light, but a profound quiet that spoke of ultimate freedom and ultimate isolation. As the necromancer's undead army began their final assault, Winter remained detached, yet vigilant. His mind, a tumult of potential futures, considered stepping in, not to save humanity or to defeat the undead, but to shape the outcome, to ensure the balance of power remained favorable, or perhaps to prevent any one faction from gaining too much control. Chapter 8. The End Game. As the undead horde surged forward, a palpable sense of despair enveloped the remaining humans. Many fell, overwhelmed by the relentless advance. Among the few survivors, exhaustion and resignation set in. Alex gathered his closest allies for what seemed like their final moment. "It's been a pleasure to have lived with you all, my family," he said, his voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. Captain Knox and Elena exchanged glances, their eyes conveying a mix of gratitude, sorrow, and unspoken thoughts. Just as the final barriers crumbled under the undead onslaught, and a wall of decaying bodies charged towards the beleaguered survivors, something unimaginable happened. The undead stopped. In a matter of seconds, they ceased movement altogether, then collapsed en masse. Miles of undead, previously a seething tide of decay, now lay motionless. The necromancer, unaffected by the mysterious force that had halted his army, stood alone and bewildered on the battlefield. His mind raced for answers, his previous confidence shaken. As he contemplated a retreat to his metropolis, a voice echoed across the field. "Interesting," Winter remarked, his tone curious yet detached. "You are undead, yet you do not share their brain patterns. What are you then?" The necromancer, regaining some of his composure, responded with intellectual poise. I am not merely undead. I am beyond that simple state. My existence is sustained by my own inventions, a blend of necromancy and advanced biological engineering. I can easily rebuild my army, as fortunately, these bodies remain undamaged. Winter listened intently, his analytical mind processing every word. Your intellect is formidable, he acknowledged, but it's precisely why you must be stopped. You represent an unending cycle of death and resurrection, a loop that prevents any real progress. The necromancer sneered, ready to retort, but Winter continued, his voice carrying a decisive edge. And as for the humans, their survival might yet be more detrimental than beneficial. They are driven by cycles of conflict and rebuilding, forever repeating history's darkest chapters. As Winter explained his reasoning, the implications of his words hung heavily over the battlefield. His logic was cold, calculating, and devoid of emotional bias. He regarded both the necromancer and the remnants of humanity not just as threats to stability, but as obstacles to a new order he envisioned, one devoid of endless conflict and suffering. With the stakes higher than ever, Winter prepared to take definitive action, his next moves crucial in shaping the future of the planet. The survivors, though momentarily safe, were not yet out of danger. Chapter 9. The End of Power. As the battlefield quieted, the necromancer made a desperate attempt to retreat to the safety of his metropolis. However, his escape was abruptly halted. "Ah, there it is," Winter murmured, utilizing his weapon with clinical precision. His device targeted a subtle point just below the threshold of a living brainwave, almost at the subconscious level. "Fascinating. I will have to dissect you later and examine that brain of yours," Winter mused aloud. Paralyzed, the necromancer was conscious yet immobilized, his mind racing through every possible escape route, but it was futile. With a cold finality, Winter increased the power of his weapon, and the necromancer collapsed to the ground, defeated permanently. Turning from the fallen necromancer, Winter then directed his attention towards the remaining human survivors who were cautiously emerging from their makeshift defenses. Relief washed over their faces, and smiles broke out as they saw Winter. "Thank you," they called out to him, grateful for the intervention they mistakenly believed was their salvation. "I'm sorry," Winter replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "Did you think I was on your side?" He raised his arm towards the humans. "You are next." At that moment, Lydia stepped forward from behind the group. "Wait," she implored, holding out her hands in a gesture of peace. "We are all that's left. When we are gone, you will be alone forever. We don't seek control or to enslave others' minds. We simply wish to live." Winter paused, considering her words. "First of all, you're not the only ones left. There are other survivors," he stated matter-of-factly. "Second, I have calculated the rise of humanity once again. It is destined to destroy itself, no matter the starting point. Mankind inherently seeks power. It is in its nature to destroy for power and control." Lydia, undeterred by Winter's bleak assessment, gave a heartfelt response. "The corrupt government, seeking power, has been destroyed, and only those who seek peace are left. We have a chance to rebuild differently this time. History doesn't have to repeat itself if we learn from it. We're not doomed to follow the same patterns if we choose another path." Her words hung in the air, a challenge to Winter's calculated cynicism. The small group of survivors stood behind Lydia, their expressions a mix of hope and defiance, embodying the resilience of the human spirit. Chapter 10. A plea for humanity. The tension on the battlefield was palpable as Winter weighed the fate of the remaining humans. At this crucial moment, Alex stepped forward. With a voice resonating with the weight of all they had endured, he addressed Winter, his words carrying the resolve and courage that had characterized their survival. "We've struggled and struggled against everything life and death have thrown at us," Alex began, his gaze locked with Winter's emotionless eyes. "Life is nothing but hardship. But look who is left. It's not those who sought to steal power, but those fighting simply to survive. People like us." Following Alex's words, Captain Knox stepped up. Her voice was thick with emotion, each word laden with the losses she had borne. "I had my unit killed. They were my brothers and sisters. My previous base destroyed. Again, my family. And now, I stand here. The ones you spoke of, who thirsted for power, they fell. What's left now is family." Elena then took a step forward, her stance resolute. "Go ahead. Use your power to end us," she declared, a defiant edge to her voice. "But know that we will go down knowing we stood for our brothers and sisters. Not to take from them, not to give to them, but to share with them. To be on this planet as equals. To build together. To survive for one reason, and one reason only. To live freely, without the shadow of tyranny or the chains of control." The heartfelt speeches struck a chord in the air, resonating around the silent battlefield. Winter, typically unmoved by human emotions, found himself unexpectedly impacted by their words. The idea of living not for power, but for genuine coexistence and mutual respect. An echo of a philosophical ideal, where individuals live and work for their own happiness as their highest moral purpose, respecting the same rights in others, seemed to pierce his cold exterior. Winter paused, his weapon lowered slightly as he contemplated the profound resilience and unity the humans displayed. This wasn't the power-hungry humanity he had calculated. It was something purer, something worth reconsidering. The chapter closed with Winter in a rare moment of hesitation. The humans' plea for a chance to prove their capacity for peace and equality had introduced a variable he hadn't fully considered, a potential for change and growth beyond the destructive cycles of the past. Now the decision lay with him, to end the human saga as he had intended, or to allow the flicker of hope presented by the survivors to kindle a new path on Earth. Chapter 11. A New Dawn. Winter's arm, previously raised in a gesture of destruction, slowly lowered. His chrome mask reflected the last lights of the setting sun as he addressed the survivors, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic hint of respect. "Interesting," he mused, his tone more contemplative than it had ever been. "You have been the first to actually make me rethink my ideas. For this, I thank you. Though your petty intellects are like insects compared to mine, you have made me think on my actions." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the weary but resolute faces before him. "Winter will not fall on you today. But be warned," he continued, his voice hardening slightly. "Should you feel this is the end, know that there is never an end to suffering. Something else lurks out there, and not all the survivors will want to be family. Some will want you to be lunch." With those final words, Winter turned and walked away, his figure diminishing into the twilight, leaving behind a world that was forever changed by his presence and his final decision to spare them. Their camp breathed a collective sigh of relief, the tension and fear that had gripped them dissipating as they realized that they had survived not only the undead, the Lycan, and the vampire betrayal, but now also the cold, calculating mind of Winter. They had stood together, united by their humanity, and had swayed even the most formidable observer. As the survivors began to rebuild, the final chapter of their epic saga closed on a note of cautious optimism. They understood the truth in Winter's parting words. The world was vast, and not all were driven by the same ideals. The fight for survival was perhaps never truly over, but for now, they had earned a moment of peace, to heal, to rebuild, and to forge new paths grounded in the lessons of the past. In a subtle nod to Winter's forewarning, the scene shifted briefly to the depths of the Alpha's den. There, amidst the remnants of the fallen pack, a lone wolf cub stirred, the progeny of the Alpha. Its eyes opened, glinting with a nascent fire, hinting at the continuation of the legacy and the cycle of life, survival, and perhaps the inevitable rise of new challenges. End of Crimson Dawn, the Final Eclipse, and the entire Crimson Dawn series. This epic conclusion weaves together the themes of survival, the complexity of nature and intellect, and the perpetual struggle between dominance and coexistence. It leaves the door slightly ajar for the future, suggesting that while this saga has ended, the stories of this world and its inhabitants will continue as long as life persists on the troubled but resilient Earth. Good evening. It's the Professor here. Thank you, every single one of you who have watched the 10-part series Crimson Dawn. I had so much fun creating it, and I'd love to thank each and every one of you for your comments, for your likes, for your shares, for your love of the channel and the series. I honestly did have a lot of fun creating it, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. I'd like to give a very special thank you to all of those members who have joined as members, and all of those who give a special thank you by contributing to the channel. It's your contributions that continue to fuel our channel and help grow the channel. Remember, it's not too late to show your support for the channel. Now the burning question: will there be a series 2 of Crimson Dawn? We'll have to wait and find out, because the Professor has many more tales to weave, many more stories to keep you up at night. So until next time, enjoy the video you see on the screen now if you wish to continue watching Professor Shadow's Tales of Terror, and I'll see you soon.